buenos días. Vamos a empezar con el panel de esta
Recording in
mañana.
progress.
So I appreciate you all for being here this morning, Saturday. You could be like walking around Mexico City, making a limpia. I need one, by the way, probably after the meeting. But this panel today it's a little different, and the idea of this panel, it's kind of like propose a turning on the past discussions on the previous days. It's an opportunity that I asked Benedict, or suggested Benedict and Benjamin and the 17 Instituto to think about having an optimistic conversation about what we can do and where can we look to think about possibilities of change, because if you don't have hope, dream, build utopias. This is part of life, so I think it's part of our process here. Since many of us work with euthanasia, eugenics, disabilities, are hard topics to work with, and many times pessimist thought kind of get over us. So for like 2 years now, I'm trying to see kind of like possible futures, ways to make a change, to kind of pivot from like this world that we're living in. So I would like to thank you, everyone. Specifically 17 Instituto, Benjamin, Beatriz, Roy with the organization. Thank you very much for having us, host us here. And of course, Inez, Benedict, with the small beginnings. You're being very important in this process. So, as I said, the panel was built under the concept of Earth caretakers and the possibility of interconnecting past and embracing new futures, diverse futures. So considering the fact that we are so connected with Western thought and Western philosophy, we're talking about the Enlightenment, we are not necessarily condemned to it. We have to stick with it all the time. So there are other forms of existence, other cosmologies, other ways of life in this planet. So the idea and the invitation is for us to look into this. So this is how I conceive the panel, as a possibility to build other futures, observing and learning from indigenous and Afro-descendant groups, and any other groups that we can name it. But here, represented today, we have these two groups. And the idea is to amplify voices, support their work, and engage in positive transformation. So as we mentioned a lot here during the past few days, it's about creating communities. So before I start, I will present each panelist once at a time before they speak. They're going to see the four one after another, like in the dynamics, and then I'm going to present our commentator, and then we open to the public. Just wanted to kind of like get your attention. I have one page circulating, probably at the back table, with the QR codes of the social media from the Redes de Cuidado Indigenous Yanomami group, their project, and Ale Santos Instagram, both Instagrams. So I invite you to kind of connect, learn about their work, and share with other people. So we're going to start here. I'm going to present Ana Maria Machado. She's an indigenous rights advocate, anthropologist, and translator of the Yanomami language, a people with whom she was work since 2007, and she worked with Ehuana Haida Yanomami, that is the indigenous leader that unfortunately cannot be here today because of a grieving process that is happening inside their territory, someone that they lost. So they're doing ritual. Ana Maria can talk a little bit more about that. But Ana Maria worked with Juana since 2007. She guides also ethnographic research produced by the Yanomami researchers and has organized 15 books published in the Yanomami language. She is a researcher for the Projetos Redes de Cuidado Care Networks project, that takes care of prenatal childbirth and postpartum care among the Yanomami. She collaborates with the Hutu Kara, Yanomami Association, I hope I said it right, and with the press in reporting violations of the rights of the Yanomami people. So just to remind that in Brazil, we had like systematic sterilization of indigenous peoples during 1980s. And this work, it's really important about maternity and taking care of labor and pregnancies. Thank you, Ana Maria. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pietra. Thank you for the invitation. Hello. Well, first of all, I'm sorry my English is not that good, but I will try to do my best. I'm here to present the project Redes de Cuidado, as Pietra explained. Unfortunately, I'm supposed to be here together with Juana Yaira Yanomami, who's a Yanomami researcher, but unfortunately, this week, one of her family members, very close one, he passed away. So they're doing the rituals to burn all the material objects and everything he had. That's the way the Yanomami do when they lose someone. They have to forget the person. They have to make disappear everything. So because of that, Juana cannot join us today. Well, I will present now a PowerPoint presentation, show you about the project. Just can you see? Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the name of the project, well, first I will present the project and why I'm showing this project here in this, with this different group. I mean, it's not connected to, it's not a seminar about the indigenous rights or anything. So then I will explain why we're presenting our project here. So, and then I will show Juana's video, as she cannot be present today. We will share a video where she speaks about the project. Temi Totihi in Yanomami means to be healthy and good. Well, the project is an intercultural prenatal care guide co-created in the indigenous Yanomami territory with indigenous researchers and non-indigenous people who works on the health system, on the nurses, doctors, anthropologists in a multi-subject group. Just see, yeah. This prenatal care guide for the Yanomami. The project started last year, no, 2024. And since then, we start to make the prenatal care guide for the Yanomami. It complies a good practice and guidance for maternal and child health care in the Amazon rainforest. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to also explain about the Yanomami. It's an indigenous group who lives in Northeast Amazon. There are about 30,000 people living in Brazil, and they also live in the border with Venezuela, but we don't have numbers about the Yanomami in Venezuela. And it's a very huge population. They are like about 75% of the population has less than 30 years. And they live really in the forest. They speak 6 different languages, and most of the communities, they speak mostly their own language, their maternal language. It's been very preserved. It's also very hard to reach the Yanomami territory, as it's a bit, you just can go there by little airplanes and airstrips that you land on the forest. Well, and this material that I'm showing you, it was created interculturally and collaboratively with indigenous and non-indigenous specialists. So we have this very rich group who really makes the difference, because we have the best of the non-indigenous science. I mean, you have scientists and non-indigenous knowledge together, gathering together with the Yanomami knowledge. And the idea of making this prenatal guide started in the Yanomami 14th Women's Gathering. That is a meeting that happens every year, and I join it every year. It's a very special moment. So you have usually 100 or 80 or 100 Yanomami women from different communities, and we go together and we discuss about women's health and all kinds of problems that they face in their communities. And in 2023, during these meetings, the women, they said that they're having a lot of problems related to their pregnancies. And so I'm going to read what Chiquinha, an old woman, said and that's why we decided to make this project. I'm very worried about this illness. Our children have not been born well, and that's why we are not growing as a population. Our children are being born rotten. Are these diseases doing this to them? I think about this with sadness. Our children are unwell from when they are still inside their mother's belly. In the past, our elder women did not have pain, they were well. But here, close to where the Nababa, the non-indigenous, live, we started having a lot of pain, and this makes me very worried. Why do our vaginas bleed like this? That's one of the Yanomami women reports about what's happening during pregnancy and the kind of problems they were facing. Oh, and this image here, it's Ehuana. It's also an artist. So all the draws here are made by Ehuana. That's inside the community. So in this project, we have these three main directions. The prenatal care guide that I already told you, multilingual educational videos, and training the health professionals and communities so they can deal better with the Yanomami once they understand their culture better and they understand what are how to deal with the biggest challenges they have. Well, and here's the prenatal guide that we launched last July. So it's already on the Yanomami land. This is just an example of educational videos. So you see it's a shaman, Korean woman who had a problem in her belly. So that's why we try to connect the Yanomami shamanism and Occidental medicine techniques. So they all can work together, because usually that's a lot of prejudice about shamanism by the health workers. I mean, the white people who work in the community, they usually don't understand what shamanism means. They think it's a devil, or they come with their idea very like about like religion idea very strong, and they can open their minds to what how the shamanism works and how they can cure women. So one of the aims of in this project is just to connect these two words, different words. So pregnant women, they can be taken care, they can be healthier. And that's like training the health professional and communities to receive, to treat better the Yanomami women. So during this project, we have, you can see here, we have all these connections. The first picture, we were working in the health center with the women, discussing about specificities of their, how the Yanomami gets pregnant, how is their conception of body, because we have to understand that we're dealing with a completely different population and a different community. So the way we understand body and illness is completely different from the way Yanomami women understand it as well. So we have to understand how they think to treat them better, to offer a better service to treat their health and their babies and mothers. And the second photo is just we're training the health carriers. The other photo, this one here, it's during the Yanomami meeting that we were explaining what we're doing. And these are the Yanomami researchers, Juana, Josani, Nina, Tuira. So as I was saying, during this project, we have these dialogues with different conceptions of body and diverse epistemologies, and the challenges of translating words rather than words or categories. That's the big difference. So we have to translate for the Yanomami, like as the non-indigenous health system works. At the same time, we have to translate for the white people workers how the Yanomami understand the body and all that. Well, so here I show you that's the draw of a Juana, of a bird, a baby bird. It's very special among the Yanomami because 80% of the babies, they're born in the forest. That's very rare today. The Yanomami knowledge about childbirth is very special. So you see, like usually there's 10% C-section tax, like recommended by OMS. Who? But among the Yanomami, you have 98% of natural birth in the forest. They have very deep knowledge about that. So during the project and during the women gathering that I showed before, especially was this meeting here, when we were discussing about body and here, during this meeting, we were discussing about the baby's health. And as I explained that we started this project, women were also complaining that some of them, they have like 8 or 10 child, and they would like to have a contraceptive method, to use a contraceptive method to have less child, because on the end it's too many kids for them to feed. The fathers don't help that much, and it's hard to feed everybody, and well, problems that I'm sure that if we have women here joining, we'll know that it's a very common problems of maternity we have as well, like how to take care and sobrecarga. How do we say sobrecarga? Maternal. So during that meeting, the Yanomami women, they were asking us for contraceptive methods. And that's what we have to, and we're doing now a little book about contraceptive methods. And we're also trying to explain the Yanomami woman, what are these methods? And we're also making a guide book for the Yanomami health systems, the workers, doctors, nurses, for them to understand all the discussions that we have had with the Yanomami women for the last 3 years. So during this meeting, the use of contraceptive was a demand made by some Yanomami women and men. Historically, contraceptive methods have been used among indigenous people as a method of eugenic and control over women's body. Although some indigenous groups carry this collective trauma, contraceptive methods are now appearing as a demand from some Yanomami women from a new perspective on the strengthening of gender autonomy over their body and the number of children they intend to have. This is a complex issue that is still under discussion in Redes de Cuidado project through dialogue with leaders, indigenous association, and Yanomami women. So that's the difference that I want to explain here, is the biggest difference. So we know that historically, forced sterilization is a problem that lots of indigenous groups faced in the past. As the Inuit in Greenland during 1960, 1990, or in Peru during the Fujimori government, where around 200,000 to 350,000 people were sterilized, were obligated to use the intrauterine dispositive, GIL, I don't know in English. I forgot the word, but yeah. So during that time, so it was very like a eugenic method, very violent. So what we're having now is we're doing the opposite. It's not about forced sterilization, but it's about women's choice and giving them the opportunity to choose. Is centered on the woman. That's something that we're building now. And so it's a politic that goes, it's a way to resist to see new perspectives. But at the same time, it's not simple. We're facing, it's been challenging. Because some Yanomami men, they're a bit resistant about the subject. They say, no, we have to grow because white people are very numerously, we are just a small group, so we have to grow. But at the same time, some women and some men, they said, no, we need to, I don't want to have 10 child. So what we're doing now, we're building now, it's that each community, there are 370 communities in Yanomami land. Each community will organize their rules to choose which woman can use the contraceptive methods. As in the Yanomami community, you have a different way of organization, of social organization. It's not completely concentrated in individual choices. So if a woman who's 20 and no childless goes and asks for a contraceptive method, the community will be against it. But on the other hand, what we are fighting for is that women, that they will do the rules. So a woman who has more than 6 child or 7 child and who wants to use contraceptive, they can choose it. And that's what we're building now in the project as a demand by lots of women during the meetings. Well, I don't know if I was able to, if it's possible to understand, or if you have some question or comments to.
Anna, it's perfect. I just want to ask you, Anna, do you want to show the video? Can we go for the video now?
Yes, that's what I was gonna do now.
Okay, I will read Juana's biography before I present her the video that she recorded. And then Roy, after my presentation, can you put the video? Okay. So Juana Iaria Yanomami is one of the most important female leaders among the Yanomami people. She's also a visual artist and researcher for the Projetos Redes de Cuidado, prenatal, childbirth, and postpartum care among the Yanomami. She lives in the Mini region in the Yanomami indigenous territory. And Juana was the first female teacher in her community in 2010, when she began participating in various research projects and producing books in her native language. She's also one of the organizers of the Yanomami Women's Meeting, and has traveled through Brazil and abroad, giving lectures and fighting for the defense of her people in the Amazon rainforest, where she always lived. So, Roy, can you put the video? Please, the video is in Portuguese. For those who speak Spanish, it's in Portuguese. We don't have like a translation. We're going to try to translate the video. It has subtitles in Portuguese, actually, because she's speaking Yanomami language. And then we're going to translate, on the aparato, like the thing, we're going to translate to English.
Projeto Rede Cuidado.
Voy a hablar, I will speak about the project. We are the Yanomami, and I will speak what we are doing. The elder women asked for this project. It was during the meeting of Yanomami women, and that's the reason why we made this project after having this conversation with the Yanomami women. Currently, the Yanomami women, we are having problem with our pregnancies, and our children are, I mean, they born and they are like asleep, they are like numb. So we started a prenatal project. It was the elder women who asked for it. Because we believe we have it was necessary to create a guide, a prenatal guide, because in all of the Yanomami land where we live, in all the areas of the forest, it's important for us that all women could have access to prenatal care of some kind. That's why we conducted the project. And today, all these illnesses appear that appear and that are affecting women or pregnant women are killing these women. So we wanted to team up in order to do something to help us be healthy. And that's the reason why this project is so important for us. Before the white people came over, it was a situation, but after they came over, our children started to die. So women started to die. Also, they started having ill children, and this is the reason why this project is so important for us. Because we want to be good. We want our children to be born in good health. We don't want to die. However, we still have these pregnancy problems, and we don't want our children to die. We want our population to keep growing. That's why we made this prenatal guide. We want that the white people can work correctly with us. We want to have access to medication, but in a good way, because in other times when we were pregnant, they gave us medications to avoid us from having children. So, well, maybe that's why the women are asking for help. We made a prenatal guide, including the beliefs of the Yanomami culture and the beliefs of the white people. We made the teams, and the white people learn how we learn about our culture, and we learn a little bit about theirs, so that when we get pregnant, they can, both Yanomami and white people could team up to help us give birth to healthy children, so that they could help us receive all the medication or all the medical help we could get from the shamans, but also from the white physicians, because our children before that were death upon birth. So of course that led to women to die because of complications after birth. So yes, we decided to make this project because we started having a lot of problems. We had pain, we have bleeding, our children were ill, and we also believed, however, that it was not just a matter of white people telling us or giving us health through medication. We also had knowledge. So this guide was, or the importance of this guide is because we can bring together the knowledge of the white physicians and the knowledge of the shamans of our own culture. So this prenatal guide is to teach, also to teach these white physicians about our practices and team up to help the Yanomami women. We don't want, what we want is to explain also to white people our way of living pregnancy. We don't go to hospitals. We want them to understand how we experience maternity. The Yanomami, we made this guide, or we were thinking about this guide in order to teach the white people how we give birth. Because when we, the Yanomami, when we give birth to our child, we are not laying down on a bed. That's not how it works here. So we told the white physicians that women might suffer if that was to be the way they were supposed to give birth.
Thank you. Ana Maria, I'll give the word back to you, and then we kind of like
Ana María, te voy a devolver la palabra.
If you can kind of like summarize.
Si quieres, no sé, hacer un recuento, una conclusión.
Well, unfortunately, Juana could not join
Bueno,
us today,
desafortunadamente.
but she would like to explain about the project. It's very interesting because we also do a big effort to form her as a researcher of the project and other women as well, so they can have the tools and the strength to decide more about their sexual and reproductive lives. So that's what we're doing, is to change perspectives. So when we had eugenistic politics of indigenous women looking for a sterilization, now we do the opposite, and we give them the power to decide through their bodies and when they could have child or not. We have this particular that it's also a collective decision, so the community is very important there as well. But I hope that we could explain a little bit. Then I will show one of the video about the seminar today. But I hope that we could give a perspective of some alternatives and projects that we can follow different paths and change history for next generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Maria. I'll now introduce the next panelist, Hugo Montes de Oca, economist. I think I'm going to read, so I'm going to say Spanish, okay? So sorry. Economista por la Facultad de Economía de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de México.
Economy School of the State University in Mexico. He has PhD studies in the PhD program for population by the Mexican College. He is professor and researcher of the Population Advanced Studies from WOWMIX. He is also a designer profile ProMep. He has different publications between books, chapters of books, and scientific articles in different magazines. And currently, he is director of the magazine Footprints of Migration that is edited by WOMMX. Hugo, welcome. Thank you very much. Hi, good morning, everyone. So in this case, I appreciate and I thank Dr. Pietra for her invitation. I'm very happy to be here in this international colloquium against the perfection for a future that is not eugenic. I'm going to be presenting some information about racial demography, decrease in fecundity, and also the indigenous population in Mexico. And so I did this with Dr. Jimenez Lopez, and unfortunately he's not joining us, but we can start then. The next one, please. So the goal of this presentation is to see the population from 3 through 5 years old or more that speak indigenous language. And the intention is to understand what are the determiners of how they're decreasing their population in the state of Mexico. That is, we are evaluating the entire biological, social aspect of this population. The intention is to understand and better comprehend the duality that is expressed in this population between their dual cosmology, between religion and education. So those are the factors that I am trying to determine the decrease that fertility has had, and also the decrease of the indigenous population. I am including Tepozcali, that is the Mexican school for practical and military studies. This was used in prehistoric ages, and the Calmecac, that was for specialized learning in terms of writing, astronomy, theology, and leadership. That is to say that our original or pre-Hispanic peoples, they had a certain advancement in that part in terms of the education center system. First, we can start with a concept aspect, the interpretative scheme, which is divided between population, territory, and cosmovision. Afterwards, we expose the method and the concepts of information that were used to be able to present the data of this presentation. Thirdly, we are also going to be seeing the cosmology and cosmovision and their advocacy for biological and social reproduction for indigenous language speakers in Mexico in 2020. And lastly, we're going to see how the decrease of fertility is happening and its effects in the population of original peoples. Next slide, please. Well, here in this scheme, this is sort of the summary of the entire presentation. And so here we can see as a main concept the indigenous people that is determined by analysis factors, also economic aspects and political ones. When we're talking about demographics, this is interrelated by the demographic that we see and the dynamic between fertility and mortality and migration. Some of these components actually give to the first little box, and this one at the same time can cause migrations, and so that is next to it. When we're talking about these explosion demographically, that is produced by different rates of growth, mostly having to do with fertility. In this population, unfortunately, there is no demographic transition that has already complied with its goal in other populations, which is to be able to keep fertility and mortality rates low and controlled and constant migration. So when we're talking about explosion and inclusion of demographics, this is also produced by high and low fertility rates, and that is something that has been impacted by sanitation or the healthcare system that also has caused to have high or low rates of growth. Then when we're talking about this demographics, then we go to migration, and then that is also what is causing. And these migrations can be analyzed with two trends. One would be a real exodus, and also migrations that are developed. In the rural exodus, the real one, they tend to be focused on middle cities of the country or even within the state. And also this rural exodus can be seen towards the migration to the United States. And so these types of migrations can cause a lack of population, or even we can talk about an extinction of population, and with that, a decrease of population from our indigenous peoples or originary peoples. And so these are the concepts that I'm going to be using today. We do know it's not necessarily the same thing, and so we need to highlight that each one, though, has different specific aspects. So for developed zones, we have barriers, first of all, that also can cause an extinction of the indigenous populations. The other analysis has to do with economic aspects. And so this is based, actually, this happens through migration. And this is happening because they are changing their residence and running away from the poverty. Either they're looking for better life conditions, and that's why they're moving to urban areas or more developed ones. However, this impact has not actually been seen in our study populations. This poverty is closely linked to the scarce diversity of their labor insertion when we're talking about this specific population. Mostly, they carry out activities in the primary sector, usually for self-consumption, and most of them stay in their place of origin, but those that migrate, they are starting to work in informal commerce activities, and at the same time, they don't have social benefits. Also, informal commerce or trade comes with some other activities, for example, domestic services, and also the incorporation in manufacturing sectors as employees. Some of them also become part of the industry of construction. In what has to do with political aspects, they have some common aspects. However, these are based on the self-organization, and at the same time, due to the different types of culture and differences in their cosmological ideology. So there is really no alignment in terms of religion. I mean, these are data that I'm going to be presenting after, but we will be able to see the differences or even some of the similarities as well between fertility and mortality as well. Next slide, please. In the next chart, we have the socio-demographic approach and the ethnical criteria for speakers of indigenous language. Here, I am associating them as a compensator. That is to say, the demographic dynamic between births and deaths, and at the same time, this can have a structure or changes in the structure and the demographic dynamics and the policies of our population. So when we're talking about the economic social aspects, this has to do with migration and the confusion factors, which means or refers to the superstructure, here refers to religion or education. That is the dual cosmovision. Migration and confusion factors actually have to do with religious and ideological aspects that are closely linked with the structure of the demographic of the groups. Here we need to highlight that when we're talking about migration of our indigenous population or any other population, that also, of course, has impact at the place that they are going to reside, because there is a shock in terms of ideology, culture, customs that is very hard to understand in a way. And at the same time, it is very hard for them to settle in talking about the population that is migrating. The next one, please. Talking about the confusion variables for the cosmovision, I can say that a variable that is close to be able to measure the indigenous cosmovision, according to Flores Grano, is expressing that the cosmovision has in cosmogony one of its philosophical ideas, which talks about the origin of the universe, life, and the group of men, that has a lot of repercussions in the daily life, and among them there are are some myths that are also linked to religion. Another one of the aspects of cosmovision has to do with myths, that at the end of the day, these are the sacred stories or narratives or stories overall of actions that were taken by gods and supernatural entities. Also, this is a body of beliefs on facts that are thought to actually have happened, and that they have given an origin to things and norms and social relations. And lastly, these go back to events that happened that were sacred or supernatural, and because of that, they go beyond the feasibility of historic facts, but they are included in the cosmogony and religiosity. They are believed and accepted by people as truths. So the problem that we have with our indigenous populations is to see how they consider, or they can even sometimes perceive themselves, or how they perceive others. The fact that maybe I am wearing a specific shirt that probably has indigenous characteristics doesn't mean that I am an indigenous person. The fact that I believe certain things because they live in rural aspects, and I can see that that doesn't necessarily mean or anything, or the color of skin. And actually, they themselves can be perceiving themselves or not. And even if they are speaking an indigenous language, they can also perceive that they are not indigenous due to discrimination, due to the fact that many times they are not considered within the society as Mexicans in this case, and from the state of Mexico specifically. Next slide, please. When we're talking about concepts and sources of information, there is a question: who are indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples? In this case, I'm not really going to be talking a lot about Afro-descendants, but when we're talking about indigenous demographics, this is the discipline that is having the hard task and art to count and defining what I was telling you a little bit earlier. So the ethnic group before race and indigenous population, because it is a community that is not just sharing a common ancestors, but also customs and territories, certain beliefs, a cosmovision, an idiomatic or dialectic notion that is symbolic, and some of these shared elements allow them to identify themselves as well as to be identified by others. That is to say, this gives them or provides internal cohesion and also external differentiation. So it has been complicated to have the specific figures of the indigenous population that we have in the entire national territory. However, we do have some of those data from the National Institute of Statistics and Geography, which is called INEGI, and so that is the source of information that I'm using through some of the census for population and housing. And also there have been articles and essays and information in the internet, among other sources, to be able to carry out this demographic analysis. Just as I was mentioning previously, this includes the biological dimension, mostly births through fertility, or number of children that were born alive, and also the mortality, and the social dimension, which is migration. That is to say, the place of birth and residence 5 years before carrying out the census. So in this map, you can see the country here, and from this, the 3-year-old population and older that speak an indigenous language, we're talking about 7,364,645 inhabitants. That represent 6.1% of the total national population. Talking about specifically, in this case, state of Mexico, you can see, well, it's near the stronger colors, almost halfway the national territory. And the state of Mexico actually has 6% of indigenous languages speakers population. But this is from 2020. Next slide, please. So when we talk about volume and socio-demographic characteristics of indigenous population in the state of Mexico, I present here the following chart. And on the left side, And to the right side, we have the years of analysis. That includes 1930 through 2000. And afterwards, we have the total state population of the state of Mexico as an entity. And afterwards, that can also be related to the indigenous population, which here we can observe that in 1970, for the state population, we had 3,833,185 inhabitants from the state of Mexico. Versus the indigenous population, we only had 2,729 people indigenous that were 5.2% of the total population of that year. But if you can see, 20 years later, our population in the state of Mexico actually doubled. Sorry, in 10 years. So we went from 3 million to 7 million. So what does this mean? That indigenous population or non-indigenous populations, they had a migration exodus from the rural areas towards or to urbanized areas, right? Or going to different developed areas. And so these cost for the population, indigenous population in this case, if we actually see the percentage of population, indigenous population, it diminished. So it was from 5.2 to 4.8. And then for 1990, it had a further decrease. So in this case, we can see that there were some effects in terms of mobility, but also in terms of a decrease of fertility. But in this case, it affected the migration, actually affected a little bit more. In the case that even from other states around the state of Mexico would leave to other areas. And so it seems that our population is decreasing. However, it remained the same. Another one of the important aspects that happened between 1970 and 1980 of our indigenous population is that after the 70s, there were some movements that were focused not just on integration, but also the rescuing of their own cosmovisions and historic languages. And so with some of the studies, we saw that because in previous years, it seemed that some of these were disappearing, like they were not being considered. But in this decade, there was a momentum to the recovery by this population because it was really disappearing. And so some of the census were not really capturing it as it needed. So that's why there was a concern. And so since 1970 until 2000, our indigenous populations have remained the same. The next one, please. Here we have the map, the very specific map of the state of Mexico. And you can see the percentage of population of 3 years old and beyond that speak an indigenous language in Mexico by 2020. The green, darker colors are where we can find the highest volume of population, indigenous population, that in this case is the northeast area of the entity. The Mascalcingo, for example, is one of those areas, Chapa de Mota, El Oro, San Felipe del Rincón, Itztlahuaca. And so these are some of the municipalities that are the more meaningful in terms of having the higher volume of population. The other green colors is a distribution that has taken place by migration. And so, for example, Atenco, Chicolapan, Cocotitlan, Naucalpan as well, which is over here in the middle. Those are the surrounding areas to Mexico City now. And so these also have an impact in the decrease of fertility and also the volumes, because it is said that the cities have been traditionally interpreted as a first magnitude factor in terms of the decrease of fertility. So migration tends to have a direct impact, and also it changes the reproductive customs of the population that tends to migrate and leave to the destination places. So this small part had a direct impact in the decrease of fertility of this population that is usually settled in some of these municipalities. So according to this interpretation in different cities, there has been documented a decrease of fertility that is a lot earlier than the national average. And so whenever there is a massive movement from these areas to urban areas, that has been very high. So we can see the green aspect. However, fertility in indigenous areas has also diminished, even though that has happened apparently at a slower rate versus the rest of the sectors. The next slide, please. So in this graph, I would like to present the reduction of fertility of indigenous language inhabitants by 2020. If you can see the population, those that speak indigenous languages, they are represented here with a blue line. So this blue line, since 2000, we have 3.7, a little bit over 3.7 children per woman, and then it goes to less than 2.5. That is, even this population is still over the generational comparison that here we had to see the reproduction of the population. Next slide, please. In the next graph, we can see some of the specific rates of fertility, which is the average number of children that women have according to age groups. And here we can see from the blue colors that corresponds to the indigenous language speakers. And actually, the average of children that a woman has is going down. That has been happening since 2000 and all the way through 2020. Next slide, please. So in terms of education, also that has a fundamental impact in terms of the decrease of fertility, because education and also employment are important factors to be able to understand the demographic dynamic of these peoples. Access and quality of education have a direct impact on fertility, mortality, and migration of the different populations. However, when we're talking about fertility of indigenous populations, education has had a different effect to the one that can be observed in non-indigenous populations. Fertility has starting to decrease more pronouncedly in non-indigenous populations. Well, due to matters of time, I'm going to start closing. So the other graphics are here also representing the impact of the educational levels, where unfortunately we still have a high index of lack of literacy in the indigenous populations, and also that can put them at risk of higher mortality. If they have more children and higher mortality, that of course has an impact in the natural growth, and so that can give this as a result. Religion also has an impact in this population and also in both variables, because even though in this aspect, those that are Catholic or not Catholic, they apparently seem to have the same levels of number of children. There doesn't really seem to be a lot of differences, but the differences are going to be given depending on the concentration and the distribution of the population in the different municipalities of the state of Mexico. So just to conclude, a fundamental aspect has been to consider this indigenous population, because in the state of Mexico, even when there are meetings of these populations with some leaders, they are asking us why we are studying indigenous populations if we are not indigenous, if we are not speaking indigenous languages. So when I was asked that question, what I was telling them is, well, we are doing this research and we're trying to find results, and we're also trying to find also proposals. And so in this case, we would like, I actually even apologized to them, because it seemed really that they were rejecting us in a way because we were not speaking indigenous languages. And so I told them, well, I would have liked that in the education that I received since I was in kindergarten, elementary, and secondary school, at least I had one lesson of indigenous languages, so that they didn't see us and we didn't see them either in an isolated manner. So that would be it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugo, for your presentation. I will now switch a little bit the dynamics of the interventions because Ana Maria has to leave. So what we are going to do now is inviting the commentator, Carlos Arturo Hernández Dávila, to comment in the following 10 minutes. Then I will open for the audience for other 10 minutes, and then we'll go back to the second part with Patrick and Ale Santos so that they can speak about the second part of the presentation because Ana Maria will have to leave. I will now introduce our commentator, Carlos Arturo Hernández Dávila. He's a PhD in social anthropology by the National School of Anthropology and History. His ethnographic work is on the study of Christian Christian indigenous. He's a professor of a postgraduate professor on the National Institute of Anthropology and History, and he's in the Department of Interdisciplinary Groups of the Ibero-American University in Mexico City. He's developing research on the art, text, political memory, territory defense among Otomi, Masawa, and Mazatleca peoples that are disputing territory to the organized crime. He is expert on social anthropology and gender perspective on the Supreme Court of the State of Mexico. Thanks for accepting the last-minute invitation. He spoke in an indigenous language to welcome. He spoke on the Otomi Ñato language from the state of Mexico. Yesterday at 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon, I received a call, and they told me, you know what, we had a problem with the person who was going to moderate the panel. So Carlos, could you come? And I was 285 kilometers away from Mexico City, which is the limit between Michoacan and Guerrero, which is an area here in Mexico that's controlled by drug lords. It's a cartel called Familia Michoacana, who are in dispute with another cartel that's called Jalisco Nueva Generación. So this puts in great danger a lot of indigenous people. They resist by speaking the language, building new communication networks, not from cosmovision, not from popular religiousness, but from cosmopolitics. And that's exactly where I would like to start making my comments. First of all, thanks for explaining about the Yanomami culture, the explanation and the video that was shared through this very complex project that has to do with something, in my opinion, that has more to do than just public health. In Mexico, we have a long ethnographical, anthropological tradition, but also a lot of empirical knowledge from the communities. They believe that health is not a health problem. I hope I make myself clear. Health is not a clinical problem. And the best example was with the COVID pandemic. Yes, I was in charge of coordinating a project in Latin America, and we were asking the indigenous communities how they called COVID, and Mapuches in the southern part of Argentina, Chile, as well as Tauramumaras in the northern part of Mexico, as well as Mayan communities in Mexico and Guatemala, they associated COVID to what they called the white disease. else globe, and acknowledges that works with Amazonian peoples. It's a group that's called the People of the Bat. And they say we're super sad because they said our ancestors who are bats are the ones who created COVID in the world, because that was the narrative at the time, that COVID came from bats. And in most of the modern translations of COVID, Amerindian translator said that it was the disease of white people. Here, most of the people are white, but it has nothing to do with the color of the skin. It has to do with how the indigenous understanding of COVID is based on their understanding of extractivist capitalism, oppression, neo-colonial sophisticated realities. I mean, you can check how in Minnesota white people are protesting against the aggressions of white people. So it's not just against migrants, it's white people versus white people. So this first a presentation about prenatal care on the Yanomami culture and how they understand pregnancy, maternity, go beyond the schemes of neoliberal schemes of what health means. In Peru, in Guatemala, in Mexico, in many parts of Latin America, there was an implementation of forced sterilization with two objectives. I heard that you talk about this yesterday. They did this with the aim of eliminating Indians. In Peru, they said terrucos, to say they didn't want more poor people. We don't want more terrorists, so to speak. So they invited a population to come to Chiapas. And for example, in Germany, there were these posters inviting German population to come to Guatemala to have children with indigenous women, and they were actually get paid for it. So this is a cosmopolitical perspective to translate from the Yanomami or from any indigenous perspective things such as body, health, and territory. In the Otomi world, the great specialist of the School of High Studies in France, in the Otomi world, in the Huasteca Hidalguense, well, apart here in Mexico, body is always understood as two halves. The half of the upper part, which is linked to the sun, where you think about, where you utter words, and the obscure area linked to seminality, body fluids, and it's related to the moon. But it's also related with cosmology, with cosmos. That's why women who saw something, but they also who intertwine music, textiles. So women who weave, so this is not negotiable, or this cannot be understood without understanding the body. So in many ethnographies, disease is not just what we understand as diabetes, introduction of Coca-Cola, the devastation of the water bodies. It also has to do with the territory. The territory stops being what people are, and people stop identifying with their territories. If we make a map, or if we look into Google what is maps, you can actually see these beautiful weavings where bodies of men, women, or elder people are directly linked with territory. And if territory gets sick, then the body is going to die violently and aggressively. So what I listen from our colleague anthropologists and what I hear from the Yanomami women, I hear efforts where politics is not being able to respond. And what I see, it's also a cosmopolitics where shamans, spirits, gods, goddesses, animals, dreams, all of this comes together in a complex network of negotiation that makes life possible. So, defending life is not just a motto. So maybe the indigenous feminisms, ecofeminisms, or territorial feminisms, or community feminisms are the ones who are helping us create a new language. I would like to critique, focusing on Enrique Florescano, my teacher. Myths refer about things that happened from the sacred and that are away from historic facts, but that are understood as a cosmogony and are accepted by people as truths. This ethnographically is false. Absolutely false. Indigenous people, they know that the gods are not the Christian God. They are not all powerful, all present. Sacred entities from Mesoamerica and from the Andina are, they speak to people, they sleep, they are hungry, they give food to people, they negotiate, they get tired, they die, they renew themselves, etc., etc. This means that cosmopolitical systems, and this is not a critic, it's more like a dialogue. The cosmovision systems are not enough to define how people get related to myths that enter into crisis and that need to be retransformed or reconfigured. Popol Vuh is not a totality. Whoever reads about the rebellions in Chiapas up until Zapatista rebellion, they will understand that the myths of the reconfiguration of catumens, which is the way of speaking about the cycles of time, they speak about a reactivation or a destruction of old myths to create new myths that can help us understand reality, which means that it's dangerous to think that indigenous peoples live on abstract elements, on religious elements that never change and are never reconfigured. That's not the case. We can see the Mapuche resistance, we can see the Andinian resistance, the Ecuadorian resistance against petroleum corporations. We can see that in the Tarahumara in Mexico, when the problem of the state and the Indian peoples, George Ballandier, in the book of Society Against the State. And I close with this. I am convinced that the state of Mexico, I mean, I am a researcher from INA. It's a faculty, a state, and I understand what you are saying. But what we have learned with indigenous people in the central part of Mexico is that if you go out from this space in Mexico City where we are, this fortress of the Jesuits, which is San Ildefonso, and you walk towards Templo Mayor, you will see triquis coming to you. You will see indigenous people. You will see masaguas selling their dolls. You will see people who are reconfiguring new indigenous identities, because identity is not a nucleus, it's a permanent reinterpretation of how to inhabit the world, which tells us that Latin America, indigenous people are not in rural areas or on the hills. They are dynamic and they live in the cities. 99% of the golden apples that you are eating in Mexico City, we have to wash them by the way, were harvested by the hands of Otomies and Nahuas from the Huasteca, who are working on the on the eastern part of the United States. That is, speaking about indigenous peoples is also talking about complex models of translations of the world. Before we wanted to translate from Otomi into Spanish, now we have to translate from the perspective of Otomi culture to the modern ways of understanding. So Benjamin and in 17 Institute, they are doing an initiative on that regard, which is amazing. So I close here my comments. Thanks, Carlos, for your comments. Yes, we are. Ana Maria has to leave, so very quickly, if you want to make a round of questions, because we have like 10 minutes sharp. So please cut to the chase, so that we can have enough time within those 10 minutes to answer, well, to question and answer.
Thank you so much. My name is Catherine. I'm really interested
Hola, soy Catherine. Me interesa mucho, Ana María, en lo que el proyecto descubrió a través de estos diálogos y a través de este aprendizaje respetuoso que describiste. Y bueno, de lo que escuchamos del video, ¿no? Que describía con mucho cuidado. ¿Cuál es el diagnóstico, ¿no? que se desarrolló, o cuál es la etiología del conocimiento sobre por qué las mujeres y los bebés estaban sufriendo tanto en ese momento contemporáneo, ¿no? ¿Por qué sangraban tanto? ¿Por qué los niños nacían y estaban como dormidos? ¿No? Lo escuchábamos, pero bueno, sería a lo mejor interesante para crear algún conjunto de diagnósticos, quizá.
especially interested in knowing how Indigenous research is answering that problematic. And yet I didn't see it. So I think the reason for the hesitancy is that it's a very complicated answer, but I still think it would be very interesting to receive that knowledge in this room, even if that knowledge is contingent and still developing. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? So before Anna answer, so let's do two and then two, like later. Anyone else? No. For Hugo, okay, Anna. I think you can answer, Anna.
Okay, thank you for your question. Yes, that's the problem that especially older women, they told us as they see the difference. This woman, they testimony the first contact with white people. So what they say is that before contact with the whites, they have healthy babies, and now that white people got close, they're having lots of different disease. And I'd say, how do you say sexual disease? Or I don't know in English how. IST, infecção sexualmente transmissível. That's
DST.
how we say in Portuguese. In English, I'm not sure. But that's one of the reasons that why they're having sick babies. And especially because the Yanomami land was invaded by 40,000 gold miners during the year, from 2016 to 2022, during Bolsonaro government, the far-right government. The Yanomami land was invaded by 40,000 gold miners, white people, who was raping this woman. So that's one reason why we got so many disease. But I would say that also healthcare and Yanomami teachers, that are few men, Yanomami men, that they have their salary. They receive their salary to work on education and health system. So when they go to the city, sometimes they also have a sexual relation with white women, and they also get sick. That's one reason. And another reason that I wouldn't say that's not about the whole territory, the Yanomami territory, but you see in communities who has more contact with white people is the change they have in their the food they eat, because now that like they used to eat natural food from the forest, and now they're getting fat food and pasta, rice, cookies, and all these kind of foods, and lots of salt. They don't know how to use our food properly, and it's very cheap food as well. So that's one of main reasons why they have eclampsia in one of the Yanomami areas. We're still investigating it, but it's mostly due to the contact. And also malaria, because malaria is half of malaria that we have in Brazil. It happens in the Yanomami territory as well. And malaria is a big challenge, and malnutrition in some areas as well. So all these consequences to the contact with white people affects the Yanomami pregnancy and how their babies are getting born. But we have a good data that from 2004, 2004, there were 9 pregnant women that passed away during pregnancy or labor. And last year we have 4, so it's starting to decrease it as we advance in our project. Yeah.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Any other questions or comments? We have to move Judy, go ahead. Because we really, really have to kind of go to the next session, but go ahead.
I really enjoyed your presentation. I thank you. And where I come from, the things you were talking about happens directly with connection from the land. If you understand that the land and the watersheds are the 2 things that will help the spine of the land, people will survive, and it's directly connected with climate change. Have any of your conversations led to the connections of reading the land and the watersheds to climate change?
Claro, muchas gracias por tu comentario al comentarista. Que yo no soy la parte central, pero trataré de responderlo honrando a los colegas.
Respond by honoring the participants that just spoke. Claude Lévi-Strauss, this French anthropologist, said that the only difference between savage thinking and scientific thinking was a scale difference. Of course, in the contemporary world, indigenous thinking is mystic, magical, folkloric, shamanic. But of course, what we've understood so far is that it's a system of thinking that has read, inhabited, reconfigured the world over the past 2 million of years. And of course, there are theories, or indigenous theories about climate change. Eduardo Bibeiros de Castro, a Brazilian anthropologist that speaks about the ends of the world. I don't know where you're from, but where I'm from, in 2 weeks in Latin America, we will have the carnival. The carnival, which is called Ntheni in Otomi, it's a regeneration of the world festival. And elder people speak right now about the lands that cry, the lands that cry. And if I ask them, is it climate change? And they say yes. And I close with a very small anecdote. Weaving women from San Francisco Oxtotlilpan, Macatzingas, in the state of Mexico, and Mazahua women from the same region, they cry. They dream, and they wake up super sad, and they tell me, Carlos, you have to listen to this. I was dreaming how the organized crime criminals and how they were destroying the trees where the monarch butterflies come, and the butterflies were telling me, why are you not defending me? For them, this is basically an explanation. It's a dreamy explanation of the transformations of climate change. They are going to say, we will lose rain, we won't be able to harvest pumpkins and beans, and what's coming to the world is hunger. Hunger, it's a very important explanation of climate change, a very important symptom.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you so much for your comment. So I'm going to now move on to the next part of our panel. We are right on top of the hour, so voy a cambiar de idioma.
Switch to English because Patrick is Brazilian. He's going to speak, I don't know if he's speaking Spanish or English, but his biography is in English here for me. So Patrick holds a PhD in science fiction studies from the University of Oslo and currently an affiliated researcher with the Genocene Unicamp, Universidade de Campinas in Brazil, and Co-Futures. His work examines the intersection of general systems, social movements, and speculative futuring. Brock's essays have been published by GFA, SFRA Review, Environmental Humanities, Routledge, and the University Press of Florida. Welcome, Patrick. The floor is yours. Bem-vindo.
Thank you very much. I hope you're all hearing me well. It is an absolute honor to be here today. And thank you for all the presentations and comments that have been made before me. I am learning a lot today. And the way that I want to contribute to this meeting is by talking about how science fiction can help counter the legacy of eugenic thought. And I'm going to use the case of Afrofuturism in Brazil to kind of show how science fiction and the practices that are around it can help out. I mean, when you talk about Afrofuturism, usually people think about the movie, but I can assure you it's much more than that. This is a good example of what Afrofuturism can be as well. This is a meeting that is conducted in Brazil, in Salvador, Bahia, my hometown, which blends speculative thinking with economic empowerment. And it uses the term Afrofuturism as a big umbrella term. Later on, I'm going to explain how exactly does this work. I wanted to start specifically explaining how I see Afrofuturism in Brazil. It's Afrofuturism is something that has grown in recent years in Brazil, partly thanks to affirmative action policies, which created an audience for science fiction by increasing education. It had also been helped by the decline in the marginal cost of communication and publishing. However, its true genesis lies in the long-standing activism through art and education, and more recently, through Black product fairs and initiatives for social inclusion and technology and entrepreneurship. I believe that they are operating within what John Reader called the mass cultural gem system, as a cultural community that combines the availability of publishing tools and the wide circulation of science fictional, speculative fiction, visual and narrative repertoires, with the community and political networks nurtured by predecessors in Brazilian Black activism. I believe that Brazilian Afrofuturism operates as a political aesthetic subjectivity, and its forms of organization intervene not only in the technoculture of speculative science fiction, but it also in the West's failure to conceive alternative futures. But how does this connect with eugenics? These are two examples here of eugenic thought and how it has been processed in Brazil. This painting by Modesto Brocos, clearly there's a temporality embedded in it of past, present, and future, and is an excellent example of eugenic thought. Brocos himself, Modesto Brocos, was a proponent of eugenics. And eugenic thought in Brazil in the early 20th century and the late 19th century used the biblical story of Ham to justify slavery as well. And you can see here you have the Black grandmother, you have the slightly whiter daughter, and then the white man and the child. So the goal is to whiteify the population. Of course, as we see with the monument to the three races in Goiânia, Brazil, in which indigenous, black, and white build the nation, there was also an idea that Brazil's miscegenation was part of the national discourse, used to justify structures of oppression that were present, and they are still present there. To change that, we have the work of Abdias do Nascimento, a very important activist and artist who used theater and forms of community organization to counteract the myth of racial democracy, including by appropriating elements from the imaginary of nation states. So we see here a manifesto issued by Abdias do Nascimento still in the 1940s, calling on people and Black people in Brazil to mobilize politically for their own present and future. These are two examples of what I'm talking about, interventions into nation-state imaginaries. These are two paintings that Abdias did in the 1970s while in exile in the United States and teaching there. They are appropriations of the flag of Brazil and the United States, but including symbols from Afro-Brazilian culture, more specifically candomblé. So the first example is Okeoshossi over the Brazilian flag with the bow that's commonly used as the symbol of Oxóssi, and then the Machado de Xangô, also another symbol for the deity, juxtaposed over the American flag. Another interesting example here is Elza Soares. She, in her final phase of her career, she started using more and more Afrofuturism as a language, as a kind of, as I'm describing here, as a sort of a tool. So this is, for example, is a clip from the video that was made and her version of the song Juízo Final, which is a very popular song from the 1970s that can be interpreted as a message about good and evil during the Brazilian dictatorship. Her version, her adaptation to the song includes, a different type of aesthetic, using more contemporary, turning samba into more of a rock version, and the video clip uses themes from science fiction, solar punk. Of course, this was released during the government of Jair Bolsonaro, and it also brings a political element to it as well. This is another example of an artwork that was created by the Brazilian Afrofuturist movement. And it's basically a video that you can change things around. It's 360.
A bênção às minhas mais velhas e aos meus mais novos. A bênção a quem é de bênção. E mergulho na escuridão profunda da minha pele. É como estar deitado em meio à imensidão. O corpo plasma em queda. Despenca como num sonho. Tudo é sobrenatural. Em câmera lenta. Um show de hologramas e eu sou a única luz que candeia nesse lugar. Prazer. Eu sou a Bi? O que é ser a Bi? Eu sou... Quantos anos você tem? Onde estou? Não sei. Se sei a importância de se saber por que falar é tão relevante. Por exemplo, não sei se eu...
So I wanted to
Tem 7 meses.
highlight for you guys.
Patrick?
Yes, can you see me? Can you see my presentation? Okay, sorry about that, a little technical difficulty. So I wanted to highlight for you guys the example of how Abian, which is a movie about coming of age as a person in the candomblé tradition, uses science fiction tropes as umbrella terms to kind of make a bigger noise, to make more noise and to have a voice. So you can compare here the introduction to this video, Abian. It's a video art piece with the introduction to the movie Alien by James Cameron. And I believe so, my interpretation is Abian uses the language of science fiction to question who is the alien. In this case, a person who is coming of age and trying to understand their self under racism and under the tradition of candomblé. So what's really important for us to understand is a concept that has been set up by science, technology, and society studies of boundary objects. As you can see from this graph, there can be concepts, there can be artifacts, there can be practices, but there are ways of making people think together. They were first conceived by observation on how people would use maps and charts in the San Diego Zoo, both scientists and lay people, to build a language where they could talk together. So from that observation, and based on the work of Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay, I created the framework of heuristic function. And it has 3 elements, which is temporality, our nation of time and its density, how the past permeates the present and the future, the existence of various temporalities and a diversity of futures, as opposed to attempts to dictate their course. Speculation as the mediation of the possibilities of knowledge and technique, both the ethics of questioning what it is or is not considered science, in a way to politicize social technical imaginaries and their consequences. And of course, the problematization of space. This is why I think that Afrofutures is an important tool to counter the scientific discourse that has permeated our civilization, our society, our production of knowledge. And as we can see now, what is happening in the United States, in which the Supreme Court has allowed the Immigration and Customs Enforcement to racialize people. So eugenics is pretty much still alive. And the last element, which I think it's arguably one of the most important here, is the genre infrastructure. I've written and published a paper on it in which I try to explain how political interventions in the constituent elements of the mass cultural genre, be their narratives, characters, images, covers, catalog data, and ways of distributing and commercializing, and the community practices of creating meaning themselves can create the space for change. This shirt that I have here, hope you guys can see it, is from an event called PerifaCon that happens in São Paulo every year. It is an event that is self-proclaimed as a way of creating the geek and nerd space for the favelas, which is how the poor communities of Brazil. So they are creating an infrastructure for change. And our next and last speaker, Ale Santos, I consider himself a great example of that because he builds community. He frequently engages on social media in addition to being a writer. So he's creating the infrastructure that will change the eugenic thought. I hope that you guys understood everything, and thank you very much for paying attention and for listening. Looking forward to your comments.
Thank you, Patrick. Obrigada. Muito obrigada pela sua apresentação. Thank you very much. So now I will present Ale Santos, that was already introduced by Patrick. Ale Santos was invited by me. We have like a relationship for a few years now, and his work it's being really important and effective in the Brazilian context. He's a science fiction writer and the leading voice of Afrofuturism in the new Brazilian generation, cited by the Science Fiction Research Association. He's a two-time finalist for the Jabuti Award, like a book award, very important, like the most important book award in Brazil. And it was named one of the 50 most creative Brazilians by Wired Festival. He is the author of O Último Ancestral, The Last Ancestor, published by HarperCollins, and A Malta Indomável, The Untamable Gang, and an international screenwriter for the Assassin's Creed franchise. His work combines cyberpunk, ancestry, and social critique to project new futures. So I would like to share a little bit a recent podcast that produced by Ale Santos addressing eugenics and the wrongdoings of the 19th century Dr. Raimundo Nina Rodrigues. He was like a Lombroso's supporter. He dedicated his work to prove scientifically the inferiority of the Black people in Brazil, specifically in Salvador. And because of Ale Santos' work, it triggered like a public action to rename a hospital in Maranhão, the state where Nina Rodrigues was born, to sue, to ask for the removal of his name of the hospital. And this decision was kind of like 2 days ago. So congratulate Ale Santos. Thank you for your work, and the floor is yours.
Consegue me escutar, Pietra?
Sim,
Can
perfeito.
you hear me? Yes.
Manda
Thanks,
bala.
Pietra. Thanks, everyone. I will talk in Portuguese and Pietra translate for me. Eu queria falar um pouco sobre a conexão da história com a minha visão de
Of
África.
history, but also the role of Africa. Because in Brazil, there were a lot of schools that still teach racism at school. The ideals of the people did not prevail. So this type of information was present in Brazil. Also, this kind of information was present in different spaces, not just at school. They were also present in the media. Black people and their production.
Entonces yo voy a hacer como una rápida porque creo que...
Okay, they're going to translate into Spanish very quickly. And well, they are saying that in Brazil was never an anti-racist space to discuss historically the situation of Black people in Brazil. In many cases, Black people in Brazil have been prosecuted. Futures, for example, with capoeira and candomblé were silenced, they were prosecuted. And throughout that time, there was also eugenics logic. And one of the main Brazilian manifestations emerged, which was samba. Samba was a cultural manifestation. It was really powerful for the Brazilian population. It broke with the hygienic image, and it broke with certain ways of understanding power and culture. It was a complete disruption because it was also a popular manifestation of the culture. And that was helpful to reflect how art modifies the way we think about the future, how through the state is usually focusing on suppressing the artistic manifestation and also the black representations. Black manifestation and black artistic manifestation were important and were part of the Brazilian culture. For example, the carnival is one of these big manifestations. And the carnival is a way of creating a narrative. It was at that time, while observing that whole artistic expression, that I understood that art is able to bring together different nations, that maybe there are some privileged people who understand the world in a certain way, but then there's other people, and these two worlds or these different worlds coming together apparently through the eugenics logic. This idea of forms of art that are higher it comes from this eugenics logic, that even art is made sense of through this logic. Such people, like for example, black people or slaves that were marginalized, they found their inspiration in other black people, and they started to find their own voices and start putting them across the world. Afterwards, there were other expressions. However, we saw how the far right and how eugenics was also prevalent. It has had a deep impact in the society, and that's why fiction helps to create a construction of these new societies. So I think that here is where lies the power of Afrofuturism, because during those decades, scientific fiction allowed a lot of black people, indigenous people, the possibility of imagining, of placing in the forefront their own responses to the crises of society. Uh, and also taking a narrative that was otherwise monopolized by white people or non-indigenous people. Now that we're living on the algorithm society, if we could call it like that, or the area of robots, the era of machines, it's also having an impact, and that really has an impact on people like us. For example, in Brazil, a lot of people who work in Ubers or who are working on delivery, they are usually racialized people, indigenous or black. It's different compared to other people who have a status and a privilege. So I think it's important to state that technology can also be a machine of eugenics. Now we have this way of understanding, or this concept of cyber hygienics. This idea, for example, here, origin ancestral or ancestral origin is one of the books. Where people can explain or put across their fears related to on one hand eugenics, their fears about the future, but also how they are being read and understood when being part of the world. Next generations, I hope that um, indigenous people, I hope they can feel inspired to keep doing these artistic constructions. Imagination must be for everyone. We all have an imagination. We all have the right to put across our imagination through art. So, in the case of people, black people who are born in the United States, yes, there might be a lot of people in the United States. However, they live very similar situations to what we live in Brazil. at some point our cultures are completely dissolved in the big culture, and I can tell you that Brazil is a big country, so Afrofuturism is a way of saving part of what makes us unique. And yes, at the same time, it's a little bit different from maybe Afrofuturism from the different areas of Brazil. Afrofuturism from Sao Paulo might be different from Afrofuturism of another metropolis, because we all have a different experience of life. And all those differences can be a relevant difference to understand that there's a whole spectrum. Here in the Amazon, uh, we have something called Amazon futurism, which is different from the futurism from the cities. Here, they have a different understanding. They focus on what's essential for the life of people. And Afrofuturism is thinking about the future, whether it comes from the city or from the Amazon. I think it's important to pay attention to Afrofuturism because it's a way of building, and it's also prevalent in Latin America. Our experiences are relevant. Our experiences are part of the construction of future. That's why virtual artistic expressions must grow and should be scattered so that we don't lose this perspective of the world. In Brazil, we have different varieties of scientific fiction, and they are super popular. And thanks to the internet, I need to say, Afrofuturism has had a chance to become massive. Rosida, Paulo Cabral, different authors, and some of the authors that are becoming important in Afrofuturism. And he's now bringing upon an evolution in this perspective of Afrofuturism, where it's children, men, black children, who are living and are experiencing or are creating an experience of life and of culture that it's not similar to that of the Western typical science fiction. There are many there's literature, so maybe the distinction on this type of science fiction is the idea that we have of the future. It's the different ways they build imagination, is the different way they think about not just the future but also the present. Afrofutures focus on the black experience are showing that eugenics is not something from the past. And that's why Afrofuturism is becoming urgent, more urgent than ever, because we need to we need to create futures, and we need to build them from different points of view. And I think this could be transforming Brazil in one of the main sources of futurism, of Afrofuturism around the world, because we believe that future also should be ancestral. That will be my presentation. Thank you.
About the futuro ancestral, the future ancestral future, written by Ailton Krenak, is the first indigenous member of the National Brazilian Academy of Letters, like modern languages. It was conquered like 2 years ago, and right after we have the first Black member on the Brazilian Academy of Letters. So it was a great, great achievement. So I will pass to Carlos to comment. And as you can see, we already like cross our time. We are on top of like 11:30, and we have like a noon presentation on the arts. So I'll ask everybody to be brief, and I want to, from Carlos, I'll take to the audience for questions.
Pues Patrick y Ale, ¿verdad? Patrick y Ale, obrigado pela palavra, obrigado.
you. In Mexico, we have very complicated dialogues with African populations, with the African inheritance. And I think this is a way of reivindicating the historic, bodily, rhythmic history. So it's great that we can put on the table with dignity our African ascendancies in all ways possible. Where I live, which is an indigenous area in the state of Mexico, in the archives we can find that there was presence of slaves since the 17th century. I am going to apologize with the translators because I'm going to put them in a conflict. This is poetry. This makes that in some spaces of memory, of musical memory of Mexico, we hear a verse such as, if I were called a black, I don't get angry because black is my skin, but my bones are white. This comes to mind because the problem is not a problem of color per se. It's where the colonial configurations up to this day, they say there were good indigenous people, you know, Christian, Indians, obedient, or indigenous people, and the bad ones who are the superstitious, the criminals. So there are good black people, the ones who die working on the field, and there are good black people, the ones who play basketball, but there are the bad ones, the ones who dare to think what Elena Garro, a Mexican writer, not even the future is like before. This oxymoron that speaks that the ancestral future we just heard about calls out several things. The first one, which is fundamental in this panel, that I was really happy that I am here and not the other person. This table calls all of us to put into crisis concepts that modernity considered monolithic. Technology, Yasna Aguilar, Mije, Mexican linguist, she speaks about techiology, the tequio, which is the communitary work in Oaxaca. It's fundamental to put into crisis the ideas of technology, body, future, past, territory, frontier, borders, art. And I think this morning we achieved this idea of this Machiavellic band that are doing extraordinary things, that is going against what's easy, going against simplification that Bolsonaro's, Milei's, Trump, or this paranoid delirium of fourth transformation in Mexico that it's assumed as the sacred genealogy of the political power in Mexico, the alt-right in Europe that intends to impose as one single body, one single language, a single religion, the religion of capital, of course. And this provocations or these provoking perspectives are relevant today, definitely. The future is not like before, as Elena Garros said. Lula is less revolutionary, is less incendiary than Milei. And I think one of the younger people today, let's think about those who voted Vox in Spain or those who voted Milei in Argentina, are young people enthusiastic for this rebellion of the alt-right liberalism, horribly called anarcho-capitalism. And if future is supposed to be ancestral, as we just heard, it demands three fundamental things. The first one is we need to recover. Or the carnival of Rio de Janeiro is captured, candomblé is captured, indigenous memory or indigenist memory is captured by the state. So we need to make some operations from the thing or from the winds of thinking, as Hannah Arendt said, that can help us reclaim that was never part of the logic of market exchange. Shamanism, witchcraft, Yanomami women, the defenders of the territory, people who are defending the monarcha butterfly, big people who are fighting against Canadian minery. I really like the text of Ale, and I remember Aristóteles Barcelos Neto. You can find Arte dos Sonhos, Art of Dreaming, as a space where many communities in Amazon dream is the fundamental laboratory where we create not just geometric designs of corporality, but also mythological rearticulations of political movements, etc. At the beginning of the panel, I saw the president of the panel. I was here to listen other people and try to make a dialogue with what happens in Mexico. And I asked the people back there to present three very quick things for Ali and for Patrick, so that you can see this. And with this, I close. This is a mural that's in this here in San Ildefonso. If you go to the bathroom at some point, go there. This is called the. It's a muralist from Mexican Afro muralist Baltasar Castellanos and Olga Manzanillo, Ranacuija. It's an amazing mural. I didn't find a better picture on the internet, but the mural is amazing because it reivindicates the transatlantic coming, but also the memories, the skin, the rhythms, the ways the black people moved from Mexico into the United States. This mural is here in San Ildefonso. It's a part of the Mexican patrimony. Ale and Patrick, maybe you won't be able to see it, but the people who are here in San Ildefonso, you can literally walk there and see this aesthetic explosion that is not just revolutionary. It implies a way of saying that ancestors are still walking, that they were never expelled, that Yemanya is still walking in the cities, even if it's not acknowledged. The second picture, and thanks to the guys on the tech area. Here's is the corner of Mexico. This is Tijuana. Tijuana has a 90-degree angle in the north, particularly in the north between the sea, California, and Tijuana. And what you are going to see on this side, it's a number of lights and a lot of people playing, dancing son jarocho, which is an Afro-Veracruz a tradition, and it came as a tradition. Son jarocho is a type of music. In the United States, they only know it through La Bamba of Richie Valens, but son jarocho is basically black music, and it's a way of reivindicate the skin, the movement of the body, eroticism that evangelists of the time were all they were at the crisis. And there it's the wall between the United States and Mexico. On the side of San Diego, there are also dancers and people there with this wooden box dancing. They say some verses. um I was dreaming about your eyes to wake up together. I love these issues of having you here with me. I'm sorry if I tell you. I didn't want to saturate. I just want to tell you how happy I am with you. So, this kind of verses that are too very much of the jarocho tradition. One sings and then other people answers. And the only fundamental thing is the word has no boundaries. The word fertilizes. Words come and go. And this, Patrick, is also ancestral future that comes from the black soul, from black soul, alma preta in Portuguese. This is Guadalupe Virgin detained by ICE. A good part of the experiences that we are living right now is that people are detained if the Pantone of their skin, if their skin tone is not white, Anglo-Saxon, and Protestant, or if they speak Spanish, or if they speak any language that's not English, automatically ICE comes and then you are detained. And dear Ale, dear Patrick, in Mexico, Guadalupe Virgin, she's called the well, it's not black, it's more like brown. I call my daughter Negrita, like a negrita, which is like a diminutive of black, and it's not an insult. It's a reivindication of the color of the skin. It shouldn't be the language we should be talking about, but that's why we reivindicate this colorism. This is a picture I took on the 12th of December on Basilica de Guadalupe, where people from Guerrero come with their masks to sing to the Virgin.
And so I was asking them why they do this of using a mask and dance to a god that actually has had a lot of issues to evangelize Black peoples. And what they said was, well, the truth is that we don't really care about the Pope, the priest, we are here because we are dancing with a virgin that dances with us. Having said that, these people, even if they have never ever read Friedrich Nietzsche, they know because that is what he said, that I can only believe in a God that dances. So these comrades, they are having a logic that goes way beyond the religious aspect. That is why I would insist fundamentally that it is true. The future would be ancestral or it won't be, and the political discussion will be cosmopolitical or it won't be. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you so much for the generosity of sharing these images at the end. And I also think that it is a great getaway for the next panel. So if you want to stay, because we're actually going to be talking about art afterwards and also ways of expression. Julie is also going to be speaking. But anyway, we have 15 minutes as a break. I think we're going to link one talk to the other. Voy a abrir el espacio, entonces no sé si alguien tenga preguntas, comentarios para Ale, Patrick o Carlos. El micrófono está ahí, tenemos 10 minutos máximo. ¿Alguna pregunta, comentario? No comments, apparently a lot to think. Well, Carlos, thank you so much. Muchas gracias, Ale. Muchas gracias, Patrick, por su presencia. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much for opening this space here for these reflections. And for these reflections. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.